Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rich, and I'm joined by my new co-host, Rach Shelkey of Toronto Area Gamers, and the podcast It's Like D&D, and the blog That Goes at Midnight, along with like a billion other things that she does in gaming. Hey, Rach, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for inviting me on the show, Rich.
Well, I needed to class the place up since we've been nominated for an Emmy, so here we are. Rach, let's start off. How long have you been playing PbtA games, and what was your gateway?
So I had to go do a little bit of research for this. My gateway was 2012. There used to be a local convention in Southern Ontario called HammerCon, and 2012 turned out to be the year that Powered by the Apocalypse exploded in this convention. Because I went back and looked at the year before, and it was just like some D20 stuff and some old favorites. But 2012 was the big year. And that year I played Apocalypse World, this amazing, intense game where they had us in a private room, and there was a soundtrack, and everyone was pushing the game really hard out of the box. And that was followed up later on with a game of Tremulous on, I believe, the Sunday morning, which was a little bit weaker, but still had a lot of promise for what could be done in the Powered by the Apocalypse engine.
And so this HammerCon, has someone stopped HammerCon?
The people who ran HammerCon now live in Sweden, so they don't live in Hamilton anymore. I think the last year was 2013. I like to think I broke HammerCon because I actually got engaged at that HammerCon. So, I mean, no other convention could live up to that standard.
It's kind of like that, the music video awards from MTV where they gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Ron Howard's brother, and he was so thankful. Instead of it being a joke award, they're like, wow, we can't really make fun of this award anymore, so they stopped giving it out. One thing I wanted to do for folks who are, again, just coming in, or for people that maybe have forgotten some of the episodes from first season, is just take a minute to talk about a few episodes of first season that you may want to go back and check within the feed. Now, some of these were part of what I submitted as samples of Plus One Forward for the Emmy nomination. First one is Night Witches, Jason Morningstar's game about female pilots in Russia in World War II. It is one of my favorite episodes. His Rita Sitch, which is the table talk section, he walked through the role of women in Sagas of the Icelanders, a game he didn't write, like a whole nother PbtA game, one of the older PbtA games actually, but he loves that game. And he runs it all the time at cons. In fact, he was running it at Origins this year. Also, the demo was very challenging for me. He did a great job of setting up a situation where I had to make very hard choices. And his emceeing skills are excellent. There's a lot you can learn from running a game, from listening to Jason run Night Witches. It's pretty spectacular. Rach, what's an episode that you wanted to highlight from season 1?
Going back to Sagas of the Icelanders, I think we should take a moment and talk about that particular episode. My first encounter with Sagas of the Icelanders is because my partner and I had played an Urban Shadows game set in Iceland, and then my friends were like, oh, you have to play Sagas of the Icelanders. And it was Gregor is the author, correct?
Yep, Gregor Vuga.
Yeah. I loved Gregor's discussion about the challenges people had taking their traditional role-playing concepts and applying that in, and his solution to how do I do damage, how do I fight in combat, which is if there's nothing interesting that comes out of it, it just happens. It's just so fascinating and interesting in a horrific way to have that be put on the spot as a player character, as a gunlugger, and be like, oh yeah, you just do 4 damage. There's nothing standing in your way. Why would there be something standing in your way? And that gave me pause to listen to. It's just like, oh my God, what would happen if I was a gunlugger in that position? Would I take the second shot? Because I don't know if I would.
Nice.
And I really liked his discussion about gender in the game, because that was something that stood out, is you had not just gendered playbooks, but also gendered moves. So if you played a character who could only be a male gender, which is what I did, I was playing the Gothy in our campaign, it was all of those social moves that I would expect a person with that power and authority to have were out of my grasp. I had to network in with the players who were playing the female characters, or the women characters rather, and go, so I need you to do something for me. And there was just some fascinating language in there too. So it's just great to hear him talk about, like my expectation was people will build characters who are a part of the society that's not functioning. And as those characters develop, they change the world around them, and it changes how their characters get to interact with the world. And that was super neat. So what other episodes did you submit to the Ennies, Rich?
Urban Shadows was one of the other games that I submitted, or episodes. Mark Diaz-Truman came on, talked about player versus player and how to utilize the Apocalypse engine to negotiate that and to do it without hurt feelings. And he also talked about how the MC needs to take an active part in helping to decide, like on a miss, what are you going to do within that, right? How hard do you go? And reading it, because it's very situational, which is, it's more of a craft, right, than a science that I've found. So I really enjoyed that. Urban Shadows was the second episode of +1 Forward, and I had this like aching desire, game designers, come up with this awesome love letter for our game. And he did. And I really loved that. So love letter is a term that kind of was adopted from a thing that Vincent Baker did, where he said love and kisses your MC, where he had written kind of some box text with a move, right? That's all it is. Nothing about Power by the Apocalypse is necessarily revolutionary as much as it is evolutionary, I've found, right? I think there's a lot of aspects of really great gaming that were cooked together in this awesome stew. And the love letter is my favorite way of box texting a thing, right? And the setup for the Act Under Fire, which is the section of the game demo for that episode, was just top notch. Like it set the tone so succinctly. I really appreciated that, and it's one of my favorite episodes. Rach, what's your second?
I'm going to go with Threadbare.
Yes!
Stephanie is such a interesting person online, and I loved her thoughts about how to make 6- results more interesting. It's something that I think that a lot of people struggle with. I hear people in the local community complaining like, I missed a roll and then nothing happened. I'm like, but that was the opportunity. And I liked her idea of, it's, you get a success, but that success you want, it comes with an edge. It comes with something that you never would have wanted or asked for, or it makes the players suspicious when you just go, okay. And they go, but what is it that I wanted in the first place? And there's so much plot and forward motion you can drive from such a simple concept. I think the weakest hard move is to do nothing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's common. I remember seeing that pop up in a couple of older games, which was like do nothing. And is a way, I think, to make an anxious space at the table. Barfing forth tends to work a little bit better, I find. Mm-hmm. But I do love that idea. I'm just waiting right now. I'm going to run a couple of con games for Urban Shadows. I just want people to fail and be like, oh no, you get it. And just to watch their reaction.
Oh man, Threadbare is great. That's actually a game that I did not back on Kickstarter until after the episode. And once she ran that demo for me, I'm like, son of a gun, I have to have this game. I spend so much money running this podcast.
I'm right now on a Kickstarter break because I looked at my credit card and I have to go to Gen Con. Oh. I reached the point. I work a couple jobs. I work weekends to make extra money at a trauma center, and I went, so how many days at the trauma center do I need to work to afford Bluebeard's Bride at the level that I want it at? And that was a mistake.
Wow. All right. Now what we're going to do is jump into one of our more regular style of segments, the Read a Sitch. Read a Sitch. Since we've got a lot of curious folks here listening in, I thought it would be neat, Rach, if we could talk about PbtA, the Apocalypse Engine game, and taking those ideas and porting it into other games, like shifting around a PbtA. Can I take my Monster Hearts character and drop him into Urban Shadows? Can I take my Apocalypse World character and put him in Uncharted Worlds?
Yes, but.
Yes, but. I love it. So kick us off. What do you think about that?
When we had tossed this question around, my starting point was I want to take a little bit of a step back. I've heard people call Powered by the Apocalypse a system. And I think that that might not be the best way to approach this discussion, is to think of it as a system that's got a standard core that's identical across all versions of PbtA. It is a system, but it's not codified and crunched like a lot of other systems are, like both traditional and storytelling. So there's no there's Apocalypse World, but there's no PbtA core, like there's Fate core. There's no real OGL.
Right.
We have common design threads that go throughout the games. You see concepts, of course, the rolling the 2d6s to get a result. The structure of event happens in the game, characters react, fiction is changed, shows up. Then there's, when you get into games written by the same authors or the same companies, you'll see similar structures evolve. That's probably due in part to these designers gravitate to different parts of the engine that compel them. Clocks, for example, being a big deal in The Sprawl and Blades in the Dark, which feature very differently in other games. So there is a little bit of compatibility, but if you want to talk about compatibility and you're a brand new MC, I really think you need to step back and pick the game that speaks the most to you, dig really deep into it, get a group of players super invested in it. In Toronto, that was Monster Hearts. Everyone's super into Monster Hearts a couple of years ago. I could throw a stone and hit just like a Monster Hearts game. It was ridiculous. But there was a lot of pulling apart and ripping apart what that game is and how did it work. And over the course of doing that, you're going to find holes because no game's going to be perfect. And I think that's when we can start thinking about where do we want to bring things back and forth. But take that time first to really get into that game and how it works. I'm not saying to be an expert or be, step out and be like, I'm a game designer now. I'm going to just write my own powered by the Apocalypse games, but really get invested into making sure you know how that game works. I do have examples.
Go for it.
So an example of finding the interesting holes. I was running Urban Shadows a couple of years ago, and my partner Rob really wanted to play a wizard. He was super into this idea that I'm going to play the wizard, I'm going to be this retiree, and it's going to be interested. And he ended up playing the one male character in a party full of women. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with... Are you familiar with the wizard's intimacy move?
I could look it up. No, not off the top of my head. What?
So my memory of it, and I might get one or two details wrong, is you have a moment of intimacy with someone, and then the wizard decides, how do you feel about this person? And if you feel that you don't have an emotional connection, then it's okay. Things carry on as they did before. If you feel like you do have an emotional connection, though, the person you had the moment of intimacy with has a -1 going forward to escaping bad situations. And in a game about mostly women with a male wizard, effectively that meant, as I described it, the emotional choices of the male character dictate what happens to the women at the party after. That really didn't sit very well with us. And we're like, this is not quite right. And we had to sort of get Rob to step back. And unfortunately, I don't have it recorded what intimacy move he went with, but I think we grabbed one from a completely different game and went, well, this speaks more to Randall is the name of the character, who Randall is as a person, rather than this, I'm going to put everyone else at risk because I'm a guy.
That's a good call to flip that around. Yeah.
I see narratively, in the genre, why you would have gone with that. And what we had was a very unique situation at the table in terms of our party structure. So it made a space to go, well, this doesn't quite work. Let's replace it with something that works better.
Yeah, swapping out intimacy or sex moves has been a frequent conversation in games that I've run. And honestly, I go back and forth on whether I prefer the idea of an intimacy move, which you see in Urban Shadows, versus a sex move, which you see in Monster Hearts and Apocalypse Worlds. I think they really say different things about the world, and so I don't know how interoperable they are, because sharing intimacy is way easier than having sex in Monster Hearts.
Well, you did not play at my Monster Hearts game. Are you guys going to have sex now? Okay, we'll just fade to black. I found it... I don't know. I found it in when I played Urban Shadows. My Urban Shadows game thing, we did have a lot of intimacy moves go off. However, when I played it last, in a table that wasn't a solo game. I was playing a character who was very sexually forward in an oracle, so I was like, I'm going to have a moment of intimacy with you right now because it's super important. To me, as a person, not to the story, just to me.
Well, that's why you play. So what are some things that you think should be taken into consideration when you're trying to hack something from somewhere else within the PbtA game? I
think you, again, have to start at the genre and the narrative intent of the moves that exist. I think with some playbooks and skins, classes, what have you, there's a surface read you could do on that character, and then there's a secondary read you could do on your options listed, and try to get a feel for what space is that character going to occupy. To use the example of Apocalypse World, what a hard holder is going to do is very different from a driver, and by just building a hard holder-ish move for a driver ignores part of that space that character is meant to occupy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You got to see what's my niche, right? It's niche protection. That's really what it is. We don't want two clerics in the party.
I don't think the game would suffer too much from two clerics more than are we two characters who are doing identical things. You could have two different cleric builds. I think in some games they do have a bit of a class lockout. I think Monster Hearts has that specifically, where you are the mortal. There is never going to be another mortal in the party. It's you. My
opinion on a Monster Hearts is that even within just that game, the interoperability of the skins as playbooks are really tough.
Mm-hmm.
Take a move from another skin. Well, how do I take something from the Infernal? How do I take something from the Ghost? How do I take something from the Fae? Like, it may not necessarily work. It's like, oh, my mortal now has wings. Okay.
Oh, we had
very mortally.
We had a guy who played a werewolf in a Monster Hearts campaign and then took the No Rest for the Wicked move from the Ghoul and then just basically built a combat monster. And I was like, you know what, guys, I'm done.
I'm out.
How does that make sense? Peace.
Well, they weren't killed by silver. That's how you could do it.
Oh, he was killed by gold.
Killed by gold. Nice. What about fan playbooks? Because there are a lot of them.
Have you played any fan playbooks?
I have. The Phoenix for Monster Hearts. I've played that one.
How'd you find it?
Luck. I think someone shared a Google Drive that had a bunch of skins. I don't even know who
made it.
No.
I meant, like, how did you find it in play? Like, how did it work for you? Like, how did you find it? Did you find a torrent? Tell me where it is.
The Phoenix was a very fascinating idea for a character because you get experience for different ways that you're physically or emotionally hurt because you're a bit of a daredevil, which I find fascinating. As all the moves across the board weren't as grabby as just a few concepts, but it was fun to play. It's not something I would have gotten involved in deep play, but I did enjoy the character for the brief period I got to play them. I
played an ancient in my first Monster Hearts game because I looked at it and I went, well, I'm not going to let us, because we were playing a public game, so I was not going to let just some rando from the internet play that playbook. I came to the conclusion it was kind of broken-y because it was a lot of moves from the Hocus from Apocalypse World, where it was like speak truth to a crowd, and which has interesting implications in a high school setting. But I was feeling around it and I couldn't make it work till Rob, who was jamming that game, said, so if this was a teenager, who would they be? And I had to think about that for a while. And I came to the conclusion that they were the kid who is 15 years old and has figured life out, figured out structure and society and everything, and can't understand why the adults keep getting it wrong. Like, they see the world in black and white going, why are you going with X and you should be going with Y? Why is there gray? And they couldn't comprehend gray. And that was, I think that idea was more compelling than the actual moves in the playbook. So I thought I got something out of the playing around with the concept of the character more than the mechanics. Mostly because there was a madness mechanic that other players at the table felt a little squicky about because they feel it took away their autonomy as characters. But the violence didn't for some weird reason. I don't know. But, so that part was very hard to engage. But just, there were some neat ideas in there. It just wasn't fully turning over, as it were. Yeah,
I've found that a lot of them, the ones that I've read through, are interesting ideas that do occupy a slightly unique space within that particular game, but maybe need a little bit of love, a little bit more playtesting.
Bit of polish.
Yeah, polish.
Sorry, I do find them fascinating because I do come from a background of culture jamming, if you wish to use the term, and honestly fanfic and like fan work. So it's neat to see sort of people being so inspired by this creation and making derivative works of it, using derivative in just sort of the mechanical term, not the negative connotation there.
Yeah, I also love that from the first Apocalypse Engine game, right, Vincent put, here's how you do custom moves at the back. And I love that there are still games that come out that talk about, here's how you do a custom move. And sometimes I get like a little disappointed when I see games where they've already created 40 moves. Like they've occupied that space when a good half of those moves are not going to see play at my table. They are just already made for me. Rather than giving me the idea that, hey, I'll explore this space and we may have to make a few moves to adjust to taste, to the style of game, the world that we define.
I do think there's some value, particularly for the ones, because it seems like a lot of games have those buried way in the back. And that's how I ended up playing in a solo Urban Shadows game, is very deep within that book. There is like about 2 pages about how do you run solo Urban Shadows, how do you change the moves around to make it make sense. And they're kind of like presented as this little sidebar saying, so my friend did this, and this is how they interpret it. This is how you make someone more combat stable when they wouldn't normally be. And it was like the debt mechanic for solo Urban Shadows is fascinating and interesting because you have to roll on it. And I love the idea of when you went to combat, you got your allies and you brought them in as a gang, and they had an influence on how you made combat rolls. That was neat to me.
Yeah, it is. I just read it last night. Literally just read the solo rules last night, and I had never seen them before, and I'm like, wow, that is sharp. Thanks for showing me this, Kate.
It goes without saying, there is because I had a note in my notes, there are a couple of little tricks in games that let you overreach. I think there's some discussion about the Infernal, and Monster Hearts technically has a move that lets you pull from any Powered by the Apocalypse game if you want to. I don't recall the wording of it. It's sort of like, it refers to something about like different worlds or something. It doesn't say, take a different move from this game. It's sort of vaguely worded, and I've heard people say, oh no, you can take things from any other game.
I'm going to go look it up.
Oh, it's under the patron ones. The wording on it's very strange, and I didn't realize it was so strange until I looked at it and I went, oh.
It's been changed in 2nd edition.
Oh.
It's specific on skin.
But,
that's still neat, though.
But my gunlugger move. I'm insane on like Drano now.
Oh god, that would be really scary. Really
Infernals are bad news.
1st edition. You can give the Dark Power a string to use a move you don't have just this once. This move can come from any playbook. So yeah, you're right. It's kind of worded like you could do it anytime you want. Awesome.
It might be a typo. It might be, or it says playbook instead of skin, I think was people's read on it.
Yeah. I could see that. Rach, is there anything else that you wanted to chat about as we kind of move towards wrapping up this porting one PbtA game into another?
Just a friendly reminder to consider voting for us in the Ennies this year.
Yeah. Any voting is live at the time that this episode comes out. There will be a link in the show notes. We would love your consideration. Thank you, Rach, for queuing that up because we'd love to have a vote. We appreciate you listening regardless. Let your friends know about us. And hey, since you're already voting, our good friend of the Gauntlet, Lowell Francis, is nominated for blog entry for Age of Ravens, which is a spectacular blog that I really enjoy how he digs into the history of RPGs. And I'm sure, Rach, that if you've checked out any of them, that it's fascinating how he'll talk about, here are all the cyberpunk RPGs that have ever come out.
Oh, I've been seeing his cyberpunk articles coming out recently.
So many. It's a really great blog. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. Rach, thank you for joining us for second season of A Plus One Forward.
I'm super excited for what we do this season.
We will be apocalyptic.
Barf for Apocalyptica.
Barf is such a gross word. I work
in healthcare. It's my day job.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community and Richard Rogers. You can find us on gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and McGay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Oral Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko Metal version and Process. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Oral Hotbed on their website, savageoralhotbed.com.